Welcome back to Social Impact Live and our series on how ego affects social impact. This is episode 5, the final episode in this series, and today we'll be talking about the 5th trait, which is self-sacrifice. So, over the last several episodes, we've basically been building up to this concept as, the 5th one that we are going to approach, and we've talked about a number of others that sort of feed their way into this. The first thing we talked about was this idea of building a somebody, the somebodyness that we are trying to become. We're all trying to become somebody. But one of the tragic issues when ego comes into play and diminishes our social impact, as I said in video number 2, is when we start focusing on that somebody and that image as much or more than we're focusing on the impact that we can make. And that ends up leading to a challenge in us actually creating impact. The second is what I look at as false humility, which is actually not humility, but is actually a lack of security, an insecurity in many ways. Because we see that ego is a person's sense of self-esteem and self-importance. And some people say, why am I the one who should go and create that change? Or who am I to go and create that change? Right? So that was another way that ego manifests. And then in the 4th video, I talked about how these different egoic methods will interact whenever it comes to collaboration, something that's really essential in creating social change. On this episode, I want to talk about the final piece of this puzzle, which is self-sacrifice. And ultimately, it is this idea that in order to create social impact in the world, it requires intense personal self-sacrifice in order to make that happen. Now, before you look at me and you say, Darrell, that is essential for creating social change, I don't fully disagree with you. In so many ways, when I look at the people who've created the greatest impacts in society, I see people who have sacrificed greatly. I see Martin Luther King, who sacrificed a lot in order to be the leader of the civil rights movement and renounced a lot of the worldly gain that would come his way. I see Gandhi, who did the same thing in India. I see Jesus, who sacrificed a lot in order to gain a lot. I see Nelson Mandela, who sacrificed a lot, who was willing to sacrifice a lot in order to lead a country in the long run, but in the short run faced a lot of challenges. And so those are the big examples in many ways of folks who show that some level of personal self-sacrifice is essential. But I think that really what it comes down to for most people to create social change is a commitment to the outcome and a recognition that at times we will need to subvert our own other desires in order to achieve those outcomes. Most people are not faced with the prospect of becoming the leader of the movement. Even if you've been in this game for a long time and you want to do social impact work and you've been doing it, you're usually not in the position of being Gandhi or being Martin Luther King. And you may want to become that person, which means you need to check that somebodyness as well that you're seeking or that you're searching for, as I mentioned before. But most of us are faced with daily decisions about how we're going to create change in the world and what it's going to take to create that. An example from my own work is that I run a business that works with governments, foundations, and nonprofits. And it's a business because I need to be able to support my life. And I wanted to be able to do this type of work full time. So while everyone needs to have money so that they can pay their bills, so that they can live in a house, so that they can raise their families, this is the way that I chose to do it in order to be able to do social impact work all the time. What that means, though, is that I need to charge the governments, foundations, and nonprofits I'm working with in order to work with them. And I don't have any problem with doing that, but I do recognize that there are times where there's a project. I really want to work on this project. It's a really important project. It will be really impactful for the lives of the people that I could serve for this project, and the funds are not as high as they could be. They're not as high as I might expect with other contracts. And so I have a choice to make. I have a decision to make at those moments. Do we go in and do those projects and sacrifice some of the profit, which allows for the business to run better, for us to bring in great people who have these frameworks and these mindsets in mind, who can further the work overall? Do we reduce the income, which means that we have to think about the quality of life of our employees, etc. do we do that in order to take this on, or do we say no to the project? And in those situations, we often end up saying yes to the project because for us, we are a social impact firm, and that level of sacrifice is something that we recognize just has to be made at times in order to move the needle on these issues. So I'm not saying that self-sacrifice or sacrifice isn't essential. It is essential, but there's another manifestation of it that I see, that I learned about back when I was in college. I first saw when I was in college, which I think is wrapped up in ego in some way. And here's how it comes off. Basically, it says, you as the individual who is doing social impact work, you are in some sort of race toward the bottom of the quality of life spectrum. You're measuring your quality of life by the quality of life of everyone else around you, specifically by the other leaders in the space. And you're looking at yourself and saying, you are looking at yourself and saying you shouldn't have certain things so that you can channel that money into creating social impact. And you're also looking at other people and you're saying they shouldn't have certain things because if they have that, it's reducing the social impact they could be creating. And so we look at them, they look at them, and they say, that car you're driving, did you really need to have a new car? Right? Did you really need to have a car that was only 3 years old? Couldn't you drive a car that was 10 years old? And there becomes this sort of badge of honor, this badge of courage to say, I'm driving a 10-year-old vehicle. I'm driving a 15-year-old vehicle. I live in a small house. I've got this, I only pay these bills. I pay those bills. I wear clothes that have been, that are this old, etc. And it becomes this, again, this competition to see who has the least. I remember being in a conversation around this, about this, when I was in college. I was sitting at a picnic table with two of my fellow Stanford graduates, and one of them basically they both agreed that this concept of they shouldn't have very much in order to contribute as much as they could contribute to social impact as possible. But when I've started to think about that over the years, I've thought, for that one individual, especially when you're talking about, do you have a 15-year-old car, or do you have a 3-year-old car, or do you have a new car, right? The difference we're talking about here is maybe it's $10,000, it's $2,000, it's something on that order of magnitude. And of course you can create an impact with $10,000. You can send that money overseas and it can feed X many number of people for a day, according to the sources that are available. But is that really the goal? Is that the way that we are optimizing our social impact? Or is that something that's actually wrapped up in our ego? In the grand scheme of things, that $10,000 that one individual is making in order to improve their quality of life has very little relative social impact value. Sacrificing that in comparison to that person being able to get up every single day and continue to dedicate themselves to this work and this mission. Right? I'll get into that in just a moment, but the real crux of all this is that it's tied up in this concept of ego, this sense of self-esteem and self-importance. Instead of it being driven by the somebodyness, or purely by the somebodyness, the level of elevation of fame and fortune by itself, it is the level of fame and fortune or recognition or reputation that is also elevated by the level of renunciation, the level of self-sacrifice that individual is making, right? So now this self-sacrificial method is being attached to the elevation of the self in some way, and it is being attached to the elevation of the self-esteem as well for those individuals. And it's just something that's worth watching out for because it has a really toxic effect on the social impact landscape, on the social impact industry. And what is that toxic effect? The toxic effect is that it leads to a cycle whereby everyone is judging one another in order to pull them down to a lower quality of life. It pulls them down to a place where they say, you have too much, you make too much, you do too much, you should have less, right? In order for you to be in this space, to be in this movement in the first place. And ultimately what I think it does is it ends up leading to people hiding the realities of what their life looks like outside of the work that they do, the work that they're committed to, the work that they care about, the work that they show up for every single day, the work that they put in, the work that actually moves the needle. It leads to them hiding that aspect of their life because we've got this toxic halo effect of trying to make sure that no one's quality of life within that movement is too high in the first place. I think it's perfectly well and fine, again, to critique and criticize or to ask questions about salaries and about those different elements to understand, the outsized nature of payment and all those pieces, to have those conversations. But I do warn against giving into an egoic space whereby we are attributing so much of what it means to be good at this work, to do good work, right, to the level of personal self-sacrifice we can see based on monetary factors in the first place. All right. So that is the fifth element of how ego and social impact interact with one another, and that is the outcome that it produces in society, is this sort of toxic effect across the board. It is still, like all the others, an over-focus on self-esteem and self-importance, an over-focus on the self within that work. There's a nuance to all of this, and I think we need to maintain that nuance. My purpose of these videos is to help you see, okay, am I practicing that element of sort of egoic fulfillment as I do this work? Is that possibly restricting my ability to do social impact work or not? And when it comes to this fifth method, the big thing that I want to get across here, the big impact that it has on your ability to create social change, is twofold. One, I've already mentioned. One is that it creates this sort of toxic effect within the industry itself, within the work that we're doing, within the community, I should say. It's a better word for it. Within the community, that pulls down people who are finding their stability within their own quality of life in life. It sets some sort of false metric for what it means to have enough, and it's like, who gets to define what that metric is? So that's the first thing that it does. The second thing that I found that it does, this self-sacrificial methodology, because it's either inherited or it comes from internally, right, is it drives people out of the social impact space. I built my business in order to be able to serve the people I felt like weren't being served. And I built it the way that I built it, where I own 100% of it, where I funded it myself, where I spent 5 years building it before I ever took a dollar from it myself, and I paid lots of other people before I ever paid myself, where I poured money that I was making from tutoring kids into it in order to build it up. I did that because I wanted to be able to choose who I was going to focus on, and I wanted specifically to build a business that could do this because I wanted something that was self-sufficient, something that was sustainable as I did this work. But what happens with this sort of self-sacrificial methodology is it is a complete erosion of sustainability. People come into the space, they work for a little while, they sacrifice for a little while, they make very little money for a little while, they give things up, they sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice, and they go home at night and they've done all this work and they still feel empty, they can't relax, they can't get away from the challenges that they're experiencing, they're overly empathetic toward the other people that they've worked with because that's the space that they've been in so long, and they don't have anything else to sort of help them land on solid ground as they come away. And what happens is people leave the teaching professions, and people leave the service professions, and people leave the social worker professions, and all these industries have this challenge of retention in a lot of ways because people are being asked to sacrifice more than they should be asked to sacrifice in order to be in that space. And then the ones who manage to make it, who hold on, who sacrifice for the longest, we hold them up as a badge in many ways of the example of what everyone needs to be. But we have a sustainability issue, right? People leave, and then what happens from there is that they go on to do other jobs where they're not forced or asked even to make those sacrifices. So they go work at a for-profit tech company instead and make 3 times or 4 times as much money as they were making otherwise. And they don't look back. They say, well, that was a period of my life where I did that work, and now I'm doing this other work where I get to build for my own life, and I get to buy a house, and I get to have a family, and I get to own a small amount of land, and all these little pieces, which actually should be the baseline, in my opinion, but that we have turned into a luxury within the world of service. So this is a few different things put together when I'm talking about this, but this is a big one. This idea of personal self-sacrifice being the gateway toward your ability to do social change work. I don't believe in it in the way that I think it's pitched across the social impact space. I think it's overly emphasized. I think it's used as a metric to say, are you genuine or not? But I don't think it's the right measure of whether someone is genuine or not. I do understand why it's used that way. It's used because it's a question of, do you really resonate and understand the challenges that the people who you're trying to serve are facing, or are you just coming in here as a tourist and then escaping later on? I get that, but that's a question we can be asking in other ways. As I've illustrated, I think it has really challenging effects on our ability to do this work well. All right, that is what I've got for you. This is Social Impact Live. We've gone through 5 different methods, 5 different ways in which ego impacts our ability to create social impact. And hopefully these are things that you can watch out for in yourself, you can watch out for in others. You can then build some resilience around as well, where you say, hey, I noticed that that's like an egoic way of thinking, and while I haven't interacted with you that much or this person that much, I think I can frame that differently, so I don't have to necessarily absorb that into myself. Because as you come into this space, as you do this work, there's so many things that you need to absorb, so many things, so many thought processes that you want to take on, so many different ways of thinking in order to create change in a society that has stayed the same in certain ways for such a long time, that we are susceptible to thinking through all these things. And so my hope is to share what I've already thought through on this journey, so that some of these things you don't have to struggle with the way that I did. As we conclude this, if you're looking for something more actionable than all this, if you're saying, hey, all that was really helpful, those mindsets were helpful, but I really want to get started creating social change, I really want to learn more of the mindsets that are going to help me begin to create a direct impact in the lives of other people, I really want to know who those people are and make sure that I can produce a real impact in the world. I'm not saying, hey, who am I to create change? I'm saying, how do I create change? Teach me how to create change. Then I have a course for you. It's called Design Thinking Fundamentals for Social Change. You can find it on my website, dcdesignuniversity.com. And it teaches you how to create your first impact in the world in the lives of 1 to 3 other people. You choose the issue that you care about. We're going to take you through how to do that. You define the problem that you're going to work on. We're going to take you through how to do that. You learn directly by partnering with the people who you want to serve. I'm going to teach you how to do that, how to find those people, how to think about the type of issue that you're suitable for solving and addressing right now, how to start to see where you fit in the world in the first place. And so you're going to have a chance to go through all those pieces, and at the end, you're going to produce something real, something tangible that produces a real impact in someone else's life, which will serve as the launching point, the starting point for you saying, hey, I want to keep doing this, keep creating this type of impact in the world, something that can be transformational in people's lives, or this was really great, it's really helpful, I'm going to go do something else, I'm going to solve a different problem now, I'm going to address something else because this taught me what I needed to learn. All right, so go check that course out, Design Thinking Fundamentals for Social Change. It's available for anyone. It is a self-paced course, and if this is interesting to you, give this video a like, a follow, a subscribe, or share it with someone who you think would find it beneficial, and I will see you tomorrow on the next episode of Social Impact Live.